I would like to give you a brief introduction of the history of this area. First, where is Pompeii? I told you that Pompeii is in the south of Italy and was part, is famous because for a Roman archaeological site, because it was part of the Roman Empire. But it's important to understand something a bit, the history of Pompeii, that we know Pompeii as a Roman city, but basically Pompeii was founded by different civilization before the Romans, around the end of the 7th century before Christ. So imagine how long is the history of Pompeii. The history of Pompeii that finished with the eruption of the 79 AD. But the Romans arrived in Pompeii only at the beginning of the 3rd century before Christ. And when the Romans arrived in Pompeii, they started to build all the most important buildings that usually characterize a Roman city. Like, for example, the theaters, the amphitheaters, the thermal baths, and the main square, called in Latin the Forum. So I prepared for you just a slideshow where will be possible to visit. Also is virtual, but we will have a visit of some areas. And then at the end of each areas, you can also ask me some question if you have some something that you want to share to all of us. First, now we are looking at the map of the archaeological site of Pompeii. What that is interesting, that we know very well all the perimeter of the defensive walls. So this is the entire perimeter of the ancient city. Imagine that the excavation started around the beginning of the 18th century. So Pompeii was buried for and basically forgotten for a long time, about 17 centuries. What that is interesting, that from the discovery of Pompeii to nowadays, we have, in about 300 years, we have discovered only the 60% of the city. So there is another 40% still underneath the layer of the eruption of the 79 AD. Okay, so we can start our virtual tour of Pompeii. I would like to start with a view, and also with the help of Google Street. We are now inside the archaeological area of Pompeii. And now we are walking on the main street of Pompeii, the main street that is called Via dell'Abbondanza, Abundance Road, Plenty Road. That was the road that connected the Eastern Gate to the Western Gate. So if we continue walking along this road till the end, we will arrive at the ancient shore of Pompeii. You can recognize, looking at this video, some ruins of the sites that of the archaeological city. What is interesting that on the Via dell'Abbondanza, on the main road, we have basically houses and shop. And that is, for example, the entrance of a house. I would like to show you that, remember that the 80% of all the buildings, let's say 85% of all the buildings and structures that you can see are original. So that means that this wall and all these ruins have more than 2,000 years old. That is the entrance of a house. What that is interesting that we can recognize these benches that were used as a waiting area. But that instead is an original decoration in stucco that represent a crown. That instead is a part of a plaster cast of the door of this house. But I will explain after how it's possible to obtain the plaster cast of the organic material that disappeared, decomposed 2,000 years ago with the eruption of the 79. So we can continue our walk. There are also some fountains like this one. Imagine that that's our original fountains of the Roman time that we will use. again nowadays. But fortunately, remember, we changed the lead pipe that the Romans used, because Romans at that time used lead pipes to connect water. What is interesting that on this road, you can recognize also on the right side some peculiar grass. But I would like just here that on the street, sometimes we can recognize these high rocks. Okay, well, these high rocks were used during the Roman time as a sort of zebra crossing, a crosswalk. Why? Because during the excavation of the street, we realized that in the Roman time, there weren't a sewered system, there wasn't a sewered system underneath the road. So that means that the streets were used as an open air sewer. Not really nice, honestly. But for this reason, to try to stay clean, the Roman walk on the high sidewalk and across the street using these high stones. You can also recognize some part of the architecture, no? of the material that they use. For example, this also is important that the central wall here, that's instead is a modern wall. Modern wall that support the material located on top, the volcanic material. Because remember that just a part of Pompeii is excavated. But there is, remember, another 40%. So here, all is to be excavated. On the other side, we can recognize also the part of the fresco decoration on the walls, original paintings of more than 2,000 years ago. Remember instead that the wood is not original. The wood is not original because the wood decomposed, and also the roofs. The roofs are not original because the roofs didn't support the weight of the ash and the Pompeii stone of the eruption of the 79. So for this reason, all the roofs, the 90% of the roofs collapsed. So when you see roofs like these in Pompeii, these are modern reconstruction. That is part of the fresco decoration. Here instead, another very interesting thing on this other side. Now we can just have a look. Because in Pompeii, sometimes on the walls, on the external walls of the buildings, we can recognize frescoes, but also original graffiti. That's our original graffiti of the Roman time. And large part of this graffiti that you can see on the facade of the buildings, houses, and shops are basically propaganda, propaganda for the election, for politicians, or political graffiti. You can recognize also other stones, always as a zebra crossing, remember. Yeah. And we can continue a bit our work along the city. Ecco, for example, also here you can recognize that on the right side there is all this vegetation on top here. So basically all this area is not excavated yet. Then also there are entrances of shops and houses. After I explain you better how we can recognize, how we can recognize a shop or a house. For example, on the right side, there are at the moment in Pompeii some restoration work. That's important to understand this thing, because all the ruins, I told you that have an average of minimum 2,000 years old. So they're very fragile. So they need restoration. And at the moment, there is a big project of Pompeii to preserve and conserve all the buildings that we have. This is the restoration of a house. And you can realize also in that case, other graffiti, propaganda for the election, but also the second floor. Because remember that the Roman buildings were built in minimum 2 stories. So remember, minimum 2 floors. That's a shop that after I show you better in detail. Remember that behind the shops, they were the houses. So the owner of the shop lived behind. Okay, so then now we can stop the video, and I would like to explain a couple of very interesting shops of the Roman time. The first one is the thermopolium. Thermopolium is a Latin word that we can translate like a snack bar or a sort of fast food of the Roman time. That is a nice picture of one of the best preserved thermopolium that we have in Pompeii. So a snack bar, a fast food. And in fact, you can recognize these holes. These holes basically are huge pot made in clay, in terracotta, called in Latin dolia, that were used to storage food. Like, for example, let's say soups of vegetables or soups of cereals, but also wine and other sauce. What that is interesting that Pompeii in the Roman time was a trading center, a commercial city with a port was built next to the ocean. So in Pompeii arrive a lot of sailors, of merchants, and they have to eat something very quick when they arrive in Pompeii. So basically imagine now, 2,000 years ago, sailors, merchants that are landed in Pompeii, arrive to the Thermopolium, to the snack bar, ask for a cup of wine, a bowl of soups. They pay, drink, eat, and then continues their walk on the sea, inside the sea. This is a detail instead of a beautiful original paintings. That's a painting of more than 2,000 years ago that shows different gods. This painting was located now in this shop. And in fact, all the gods are a bit related with the commerce. For example, this one on the left side, that is the representation of Mercury. Mercury, called by the Greeks Hermes. Remember that Roman and Greeks usually have the same gods. They just changed the name. So Hermes was the messenger of the gods, but was also the god that protect the commerce, the trade, the merchants. On the right side, instead, we can recognize another god next to an animal. Can you see a bit the animal down there? Well, this is the representation of a panther. The panther is always the animal connected to Bacchus. Bacchus or Dionysus for the Greeks. That was the famous god of wine. In the center, instead, we can recognize a goddess that she's holding a cornucopia. The cornucopia, that is the horn of abundance, of plenty. So are all basically related to the right way of trade, the commerce, so connected to the merchant and the market. Now, another shop, interesting, Pistrinum, the Roman bakery. And that is what we can see in Pompeii, the ruins of a Roman bakery. These are grinding mills that were used for grinding the wheat, then produce the flour. And this one instead, built in bricks, in terracotta bricks, in clay bricks, this is the oven. To understand better, I also show you a reproduction, that shows the slaves that turn the grinding mills, because basically the grinding mills were made with two rocks. So the contact with two rocks, grinding the grain, produce the flour, and with the flour, they bake the bread into the oven. That is also on the side here, you can see also a section to understand a bit better how they work. About the Roman food, we know something about the Roman food basically through the frescoes, the paintings. These are original paintings found in Pompeii, so that show us that Romans eat a lot of fruits, like you can see apple, grapes, pomegranate here, some probably inside this pot we can imagine walnuts, and some other food storage in these other amphoras, in this other terracotta pot. But we have also other fresco that represent eggs, birds, other liquid, maybe wine, or other something. But again, another incredible things of Pompeii is not just that we can see the beautiful paintings of 2000 years ago, but during the excavation of Pompeii, we can find also the original carbonized food. And I would like to show you some of the example. Like in that case, you can see a carbonized loaf of bread. So that's a loaf of bread of the Roman time. So that's carbonized bread of 2000 years ago. But not just that. We have olives, carbonized olives. Or these are almonds. Or that is very interesting. This is a pot, also made in terracotta. Well, Romans usually have this pot, and they fill the pot with fresh clay, okay? Then they put inside this fresh clay the eggs. So basically they store the egg inside the fresh clay. Probably they use this kind, of course they don't have the refrigerator or something like that, so they use the fresh clay to store the eggs. And you can see also some egg shell here from the time of the Roman. Last picture about the food is this one. It seems a bit strange and weird. Well, basically this was one of the most popular food of the Roman time, called in Latin garum. The garum was basically a sauce made with different layers of fish and herbs that they use on top of all large part of the foods. Let's say that was a sort of ketchup, okay, of the time of the Roman, because instead of salt that was very expensive, they usually use some drops of garum on top of different food. Now also, I would like to show you the representation of a house, because remember that the shops, you can see here a representation of a shop, of a thermopolium, the snack bar, the fast food, were usually located in a room of a house, remember, on the street front. So the owner of the shop was the owner of all the house. Just very quick, I would like to show you one of the best preserved house that we have in Pompeii. That's the plan of the house of Menander. We have the atrium with beautiful paintings. That pool is quite interesting because it was used for collecting rainwater. Because underneath the floor there is a big tank, a big cistern that was used for collecting the rainwater. Rainwater that was used for the daily life of the Roman time, washing, cleaning, cooking, etc. That is also one of the best preserved houses that we have in Pompeii, the house of Menander. Remember that this was the atrium next to the entrance, but we have also the peristilio, the garden, that was mostly the private area of the house. I would like to show you some frescoes, mosaics, and materials that we have found during the excavation of this house. Like, for example, a safe box. Inside the safe box, we have found beautiful, that are the original silver vessels, silver cups or plates in silver, original from the time of the Roman, that we have found inside this house. But also beautiful mosaics. The mosaics are like sort of let's say a kind of carpet, but made with very tiny stones. And this is a beautiful scene of fishing and swimming on this mosaic that was used to decorate a private bath. Also, that is very important because in this house we have found a private bath. Usually the baths in the Roman time were public. So when we found a private bath, we are sure that the owner of the house is quite a rich man. Then that is also very interesting, always in the same house, that is on the wall in a corner of the garden. Well, that is a shrine to worship not just gods and goddesses, but in that case, they worship the ancestors. So their ancestor, the ancestor of the family, were worshipped at the time of the Roman. And basically these small statues are the busts of the ancestors. The Romans were very connected with the other life, the afterlife, the other world, because also when a member of the family died, there was this huge procession that started from the home, from the house, to the external part of the city. Because remember that in the Roman time, the cemetery, the tombs were always located outside the defensive walls. So imagine at that time this long funeral procession. And it's interesting that for the most important family, they also have slaves, servants. The Romans use a lot. The Roman Empire was based on the slave powers, and usually during the funeral procession, the slaves wear the masks made in wax of the ancestor of the family. So to recreate, like the passage, to the other life, to the afterlife. And then at the end of this section, just the fresco that represent Menander. So remember, this was the house of Menander. But who was Menander? Menander was a Greek poet, but we know that Menander, he never been to Pompeii, he never stayed in Pompeii. So why we call this house the house of Menander? Because remember that during an excavation, for an archaeologist, is very complicated to find an inscription, to find an inscription that shows the name of the family, the name of the owner. So usually it's the archaeologist that gave the name of the house from the most important frescoes, mosaic artifacts that find during the excavation. And in that case, the archaeologist that work here, looking at these beautiful frescoes, he imagined that it was this man reading a book was the ancient Greek poet Menander. And for this reason, we call this house the house of Menander. Okay, so now we are back on the Pompeii map. I don't know, Alex, if you if we want to, there are some questions. I saw the chat room, so I don't know if there is some question about this part of the city that we have visited. People want to ask something. Just I would like to ask from the, okay. Control. Okay, so no question. I would like just to open the chat.
I see what I did. My microphone was muted. We do have a couple of questions. Our first question is if Pompeii was originally Etruscan.
Pompeii, well, Etruscan. Okay, about the Pompeii, the history of Pompeii. During the excavation, we realized that the first people that live in that area, that at that time was not called Pompeii, we don't know the name of the first settlement. Well, we realized that the first people that live in Pompeii around the end of the 7th century before Christ were different civilization composed by Etruscan. So yes, there were Etruscan that we know better in Tuscany and in the north of Latium, but there were also here in the south and in Pompeii. So Etruscan, Greeks that came from Achaia, a region of the mainland of Greece, and Oscans. The Oscans instead were local people that live in few small villages around the Vesuvius. So basically, it seems that these different civilizations lived together from the end of the 7th century before Christ. After that, at the end of the 5th century BC, arrived another Italian civilization called Sanniti, Samnites we can translate, and the Roman instead conquered Pompeii only at the beginning of the 3rd century before Christ. So I hope that that's explain a bit better the history and the question, yeah.
We have two more questions. The
Sì.
first question is what stone is used in the buildings? And the second question is where is the cemetery?
Allora, the stones that in Pompeii usually use the Romans use volcanic rocks, volcanic stone. Why? Because it's important to understand that Pompeii is built on the top of a plateau of volcanic rock. Volcanic rock that came from a previous eruption of the previous eruption of the Vesuvius of about 25,000 years ago. So that's mean that before Romans, before Samnites, before Greeks, before Etruscans, so in the geological time, 25,000 years ago, there was this huge eruption. And then this eruption created rocks, volcanic rocks, so the Roman basically used the material that they find around the area. So basalt, basically, and tufa rock, tough rock, that are two quality of volcanic rock. And also the Romans, as I told you, use the bricks for the building. So the Roman invented the terracotta bricks, and they use volcanic rock and bricks in Pompeii.
I can't believe you can remember so much of this. We only have 200 years of history to remember, and you have so many centuries.
It's a bit different, yeah.
Last question was, where is the cemetery located?
Okay, the cemeteries. The cemeteries are located. Allora, can you see the map? Yes, can you see the map?
Yes.
Perfetto. So basically, remember I told you that we know this is all the defensive walls of the city. So the cemetery are located outside the defensive walls. We have an important cemetery here outside the Herculaneum gate. Another very interesting here outside the gate of Nuceria, and probably the most famous is here. Is all these cemetery and tombs that were located here. Imagine the Roman tombs next to the gate as a sort of mausoleum, huge tombs that were used also as a sort of propaganda for the families. Why? Because imagine foreigners, a family, a man, a merchant that came from another city to Pompeii. So the first thing that he saw before to enter inside the city were the tombs. So more beautiful and decorated with marbles, mosaics, frescoes was the tomb. More important was the family. So looking at the tombs, the foreigners, the people that came to Pompeii, they realized to which family go to have business and trade. So also the tombs during the time of the Romans were used as a propaganda, basically. Quite clear?
Yeah, very interesting.
Okay. Perfect. There are other questions, or we can visit another area of the city?
No, I think that's it for now. We can go ahead and visit another area.
Okay. So like just to open. Okay. So we can move to see that is also quite interesting. We can have another walk with the help of Google Maps, Google Street. We can walk another bit in Pompeii. We are in the main intersection of Pompeii. We are still on the main road, remember, Via dell'Abbondanza. And you can recognize here very clear, no, the basalt rocks, the basalt was used to build the streets. So the roads are built in basalt. Instead, in general, the stone that they use for the walls were or tufa, the other volcanic rock, softer, and the bricks. That is an inscription that shows the name of the house. So Domus Cornelia, Domus in Latin means house, and Cornelia so was the house of the Cornelia family. These are entrances of shops. always characterized by a kind of track that was used for a sort of sliding doors, a folding gate that the Roman used, made in wood for the entrances of the shops. That is the entrance of the thermal baths, one of the baths that we have in Pompeii. That's these small rooms, remember, are always shop located on the street front. We can reach this crossroad. That's quite interesting because, well, on that side, that is the northern side, northern direction, this is a very popular road in Pompeii. That is the Via del Lupanare, let's say a sort of red light district of Pompeii, of the Roman time. This instead is the road to the west side, so to the Forum, to the main square, and to the ancient shore. This one instead, to the southern side, is the road that connects to the theaters, because remember that in Pompeii we have one amphitheater and two theaters. The amphitheater was used for the show of gladiators and the fighting between gladiators and exotic animals. Instead, the theaters were used for the actors. I would like just to stop for a detail here, because sometimes on the wall you can recognize these square holes, where these holes were used for wooden beams that support the second floor. Because remember that in the Roman time, usually all the buildings were built in 2 stories, in 2 floors. The second floor of the houses were usually used for the slaves. The slaves slept on the second floor because the room were smaller and hotter during the summertime. Remember that in Pompeii it could be very hot during the summer, in South Italy in particular. Instead, the second floor of the shop was used usually as a storage room, but sometimes was used also as a lupanare, that is the Latin word to indicate the Roman brothel. That's a description. This description instead are not original, but are used by the archaeologists to divide the city in different blocks and quarter. That's another fountain. I told you that this originated from the Roman time, but of course we changed the lead pipe that the Roman used. So now is drinking water. Yeah. So we can have now a focus on the thermal baths. That is one of the most important public building of the Roman time, and then we can finish with the Forum area. I will just
real quick. Your microphone seems to be cracking and making pop sounds.
Now?
Oh, that's
also.
That's better.
Now it's okay. Okay, probably I moved too close to my mouth. Okay, so that is just an overview from, in that case, Google Earth, of the main crossroad, so the Via dell'Abbondanza and Via Stabiana, north, south, east, west, and this is an overview of the thermal baths, one of the public baths that we have in Pompeii. Imagine the baths as a kind of spa, a modern spa, a fitness center. So the central area here was an open air space that was used by the young Roman for practice sports. So imagine 2000 years ago, the Roman that do some running or wrestling, or indeed this one here, that is an natazio that could be translated in English as a swimming pool. I would like to show you, well, that is the plan of the thermal baths, but it's better a reconstruction. So that was the space for the sports, the swimming pool. Probably inside here there was a massage room, but the most important area was this section, this side here, because there were the baths. baths that in the Roman time were divided into sections, the men's section and the women's section. Both the sections were divided in 3 rooms that depend on the temperature of the water and of the air inside. So we have frigidarium for cold water, tepidarium, tepid water and tepid air, calidarium, hot water and hot air. I would like to show you some picture. And this, for example, is very nice. This inside the women's section, this room is the frigidarium, and you can see the ruins of the pool for the cold water. So inside here, there was the cold water. But what is interesting that this room is called also apodeuterium. The apodeuterium could be translated in English as a changing room. So basically, all these shelves that you can see on the sides are kind of modern lockers, where the women in that case put their clothes, their soaps, their oils, perfumes, for the baths. The other interesting thing is that you can recognize one of the few examples of original roof. Because remember, I told you that the 90% of the roof in Pompeii collapsed. But why? Because we're made with wooden beams and clay tiles that didn't support the weight of ash and stone. Instead, in that case, the roof was a vaulted roof built in bricks and stone, so was much stronger and supported perfectly the weight of the volcanic material. So basically, in that case, we are inside a room perfect preserve of 2,000 years ago. That instead is another picture of the men's section, always of the frigidarium, so the circular pool that was filled with cold water, but also the baths were completely decorated with beautiful paintings. This is a paintings that represent a garden, and in origin also the ceiling was completely covered with a fresco, with a painting that represent a night sky with yellow stars. Now it's impossible to see, but when you will come to Pompeii and visit on the site, for real, you will also recognize some of the yellow stars still possible to see now in the blue parts of the fresco. That instead is just to explain you the how the Roman hit the room, because this is the calidarium of the men's section, so room for hot water, hot air. That is the floor, and if you can recognize, the floor is supported by all these pillar bricks. Pillar bricks that was used to support the floor, but also they leave an empty space between each other. So basically, this space was used to spread the hot air that was the hot air that passed underneath the floor and behind the walls, and envelop all the room like a sauna, like a steam room. Okay?
All right.
Clear? So now I would like to back to the map, and maybe we can have a walk on the forum, because I would like to show you also another most important area of Pompeii, but also with a focus of the famous plaster cast of the bodies of the victims of Pompeii. That is one of the most famous things that we have in possible to see.
We have one question.
See, of course, I can, so I think back to the map here. Yes, please.
Yeah. The changing room where they have the lockers,
See.
would they be able to close those so that no one can steal things from
No, well, close, no, probably no. They probably have just a small sort of fabric curtains that just close, but was not. Well, remember that in any case, at the Roman time, also the use of the baths, I told you that was public, but was probably, and also imagine also the slaves use the baths, because for hygiene reason, of course, also the slaves had to use the baths. But probably all the different classes have different times. And also the baths was a place for socialization. So imagine that in any case, they know each other, when they stay in this. So it's a bit harder to imagine that there were thieves entering with the people inside. And
Right.
So something, yeah.
We do also have one question about
Sì.
the toilets.
Okay, toilets. Well, the latrine. Latrine, as the name of the Roman toilets, basically also the Roman toilets were usually they have public toilets. They use public toilets. There is another section of the thermal baths. There is the section just for the toilets. Now, imagine the Roman toilets, the latrines, that basically just a wooden shelf with a hole. Several holes, so they sit next one each other, next to the other, and underneath there was just or a wooden basket or something like that. And remember that usually with no sewage system, all this stuff went on the street. But in any case, it seems not really nice, but remember that in any case, every day the Roman cleans and wash the streets. Also remember with the use of the running water from the public fountains, because the water, it was running water, yeah.
Very interesting.
Okay, there are other questions, or we can move to the last part and visit the forum.
We can yes.
Okay, let's go to the forum. So, just I would like to use also again a bit the street view, where we can recognize a part of the Roman Forum, that is the main square of Pompeii. In general, in all the Roman city, we have the main square called Forum. That was the area used for the trade, the commerce. Imagine that here arrived sailors, merchants, and they sold every day. There was a market in the center of the square here, where they sold all the stuff. From here, I would like just to stop first for a while, because there is one of the best view of Pompeii, with the white marble columns that surrounding the main square, the forum, but in the background we can recognize the shape of the Mount Vesuvius, the volcano that buried and destroyed the city in the 79 AD. If you pay attention, you can recognize two peaks that characterize the Vesuvius. But in the Roman time, you have to imagine that the two peaks were linked in one huge mountain that was more high than now. Probably was 2 times high respect nowadays. Was around 2,000 meters. Nowadays is about 1,300 meters. So really large part of the Vesuvius blew up during the eruption of the 79. And imagine the eruption at that time. It was early in the morning, and when there was the eruption, and imagine that from the Vesuvius, a huge columns of ash started from the top and went up into the sky for about 35 kilometers, about 22 miles up into the sky. Now imagine these huge columns of ash created an enormous cloud that covered the sky and also the sun. It was early morning, I told you, but basically became like a night, very, very dark. And after 5-6 hours, this huge cloud of ash started to fall down. First like light rain, and then really like a sort of tsunami or a sort of avalanche of ash that buried and destroyed everything. Remember, in just 24 hours, Pompeii was buried by an average of ash of between 20 and 24 feet of ash in just 24 hours, one day. So in one day, basically, Pompeii disappeared from the maps of the Roman time. You can recognize here a part of the original floor made in marble. We don't have all the marble slabs because in any case, during the first time of excavation in the 18th century, the royal family, the Bourbon royal family, reuse this marble to build the royal palace in Napoli or churches in other cities of the kingdom. This is instead the ancient granary that nowadays is used as a storage room where it's possible to see some of the artifacts, but also some of the plaster cast of the victims of the eruption of the 79. These are here some example, but now I would like to explain better how it's possible to see in Pompeii the body of the people that died 2,000 years ago. So we can, this is another example, we can stop for a sec. and move here. So about the plaster cast, I would like to show you this fresco because it's very interesting. It's an original fresco now conserved in the National Archaeological Museum of Napoli, because, well, remember that all the most important mosaics, frescoes, artifacts are inside the museum because are better preserved respect on the open air space in Pompeii. And in particular, this one shows us the Vesuvius with one huge peak, so higher. Remember that the Roman didn't know that the Vesuvius was a volcano because the previous eruption was a long time ago before the Roman, a long time before the Roman. They used the slopes of the Vesuvius for vineyard to produce wine. So the Roman used the Vesuvius as a big vineyard. And that is the representation. This man is the representation of Dionysus. Remember Bacchus, the god of wine, were like a huge grape. Then that is a photo, a picture, a reproduction of the eruption of the 79. So you can imagine like really the avalanche of material, of ash that by the city. But people died in Pompeii, not for the ashes, but the people died for the toxic gases. So the people died asphyxiated, intoxicated in 2-3 seconds. And after that, the wave of ash buried completely the body. So now, looking at this picture, we can recognize something. So the people died, then were completely buried by the ash. Now, over the millennia, the ash solidified and became a sort of rock, a tender rock. But the natural decomposition of the organic material left a cavity, a hole in this layer of solidified ash. So now, at the end of the 18th century, a clever archaeologist called Giuseppe Fiorelli, that was the director of the excavation at that time, he had the idea to pour into in this cavity a liquid plaster. And you can recognize here in the drawing, the picture here. So he poured into liquid plaster. When the liquid plaster filled the cavity and solidified, we obtain the plaster cast of the bodies of the victims. So it's basically positive and negative. And here there are some examples of the plaster cast that we have found. Here is the famous Garden of Fugitives with about 15 people that tried to escape from the Vesuvius, but it was impossible to survive. And they're still located in that time. That is also quite a famous plaster cast. It's the plaster cast of an adult, of a boy, probably, that he seems praying, but basically he tried to protect himself, the nose, the mouth, from the toxic gases, but of course it was impossible to survive. And in that case, it's really like frozen in time. Remember that we have a plaster cast not only of human, but also we have plaster cast of animals. That's another one very famous, that is the plaster cast of a dog. The detail is that we can recognize the track of the collar. So this dog was chained and it was impossible to escape. Because in general, we imagine that the animals are more sensitive about the catastrophic event. So probably he was not chained, he could escape and run away. In the last excavation, instead, we have found the plaster cast of a horse. So that is one of the new discoveries of last year. In that case, the horses were closed in a stable and so died inside the stable. But remember that we can obtain the plaster cast of all the organic material. So not only bodies of people and animals that died, but also organic material like door, wooden door. That is a plaster cast of a wooden door, because also the wood decomposed, left a cavity, so we can obtain the plaster cast of a wooden door. That's an original plaster cast of a door of 2,000 years ago. But, and I will finish with this, that we can obtain also, that's just a drawing, but we can obtain also the plaster cast of the roots of trees. So in that case, with the help of botanic and biologists, we can study the plaster cast of the roots and we can recreate the landscape of 2,000 years ago. And for this reason, that's a view of the area of the amphitheater of Pompeii in the background, but you can recognize a vineyard. Yes, because during the excavation of this garden, we have found the plaster cast of grapes. So we recreate a vineyard with the same distances between grapes like in the Roman time. And there are about 20 years at the moment, next to 20 years, that we make wine again in Pompeii. Okay, so just that life is continuing also after this catastrophic event. So, well, I don't know if you have question. I just show you also this, in the background, this aerial view of the archaeological site with some of the other spots that is possible to visit in Pompeii, like the amphitheater, the gymnasium, and that also.
We have two questions.
See, of course. I can run this video and then stop. Yeah, please.
One is, was all of what connected the two peaks of Vesuvius, did all of that come away in one eruption?
See. Was the big eruption destroy quite completely the Vesuvius. Then we had other eruption. Remember that the Vesuvius is still active. The last eruption was in the 1944. But was during the World War II was not a strong eruption, fortunately. And at that time, there were the Allies, the Americans in Naples, that took a lot of pictures of this eruption from the flights. In any case, well, the large part of the Vesuvius was destroyed by the eruption of the 79. So the eruption, the strongest eruption that we know, that buried Pompeii. Yeah.
And then the other question is, were the toxic gases, were they superheated? Were they very hot to breathe in?
Well, that is a big is a different, because we speak. Speaking about Pompeii, but remember that Pompeii was not the only city that was buried by the eruption of the 79. There was also another city called the Herculaneum. Herculaneum, well, was closer to the Vesuvius. So in that case, imagine that there was a flood of mud mixed with the pyroclastic material that buried the city for about 60 feet. So 3 times more than Pompeii. And in that case, the people died not for the toxic gases, but from the hot gases that arrive at a temperature of about 600 degrees. So people burn instantaneously. And for this reason, in a Herculaneum, we cannot see we cannot find the plaster, we cannot obtain the plaster cast of the bodies of the victims. Just quick things about this overview, that this is the view of the main square of the forum, and with all the public buildings around. And just imagine, look at how huge is the archaeological site, really, so you can spend days in Pompeii. And I would like just to finish with this view of the ruins of Pompeii with the Vesuvius in the background. And it is one of the most characteristic view of these archaeological site.
Beautiful. The city was clearly very big. What was the population of Pompeii at the time?
About the population, well, not very easy to answer this question, but we suppose, looking at the seats of the theaters and the amphitheaters, that in Pompeii lived about next to 20,000 people.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, this was so wonderful. We have so many people who came after we started. We have now up to 17 people who came and joined us.
Oh,
we really thank you so much for showing us Pompeii. And if anyone has any extra questions, you're more than welcome to put them in the chat. I have been putting pictures from the slideshow into the chat. So if anyone wants to get a closer look at some of the pictures that Roberto provided to us, you can do that. I even found one picture of a toilet.
See? Okay.
From my trip to Pompeii many years ago.
Okay.
But we also have, because Americans, we love to tip people. We love to give them a little thank you from us. I will put a link to Roberto's PayPal in the chat room. So if anyone would like to give Roberto just a little something sweet for doing this for us.
Well, I hope that you enjoy these virtual tour, this walk, this virtual walk in Pompeii.
Wonderful.
And I hope that for about 1 hour you escape a bit from the lockdown.
Yes, I think we were all transported to Italy for a little bit, and it was very nice. I also have put Roberto's TripAdvisor link in the chat room as well. So if you want to give him a review on TripAdvisor, you can also do that.
Yes, could be appreciated. Yeah, a review. Yeah, of course, if you have the time. Yes.
Oh, we have so many people who say thank you so much. Again, this was so wonderful.
I'm happy that you enjoyed it. And this, of course, remember that it's just an appetizer of Pompeii, because I wait for you here in Pompeii so we can have a walk together on real and discover a lot of other interesting parts of the archaeological site.
Of course, and hopefully one of our friends will be able to come and buy you an aperitif.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you must come and visit us as well.
Yes, come to Austin.
Come to Austin. Yeah, why not? I've been one time in US, but not to Austin. I passed the Texas because I was one time that I was in Chicago. I was with a friend and we spent about 1 month in US. So we decided to hire a car and drove all the Route 66 from Chicago to LA. So we drove also a bit on the top of the north of Texas, I think Amarillo.
Oh yeah, Amarillo.
Yeah. Sí.
Well, hopefully we can do this again, and perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about Italy if we do happen to do this again. We'd love to have you again.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, we can again organize other parts of Pompeii or maybe other parts of Italy that are close to me, like the Amalfi Coast, Capriano. I don't know. Well, we can.
I know a couple of pictures of the Amalfi Coast, and we can pretend that we are in the water. It'd be very nice.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again. Grazie mille, a million.
It was my pleasure. Grazie a voi.